Honey? Where are you?
No, she left me.
I woke up in a hotel room in Stockholm to a text message that made my blood run cold. LMAO, you looked so peaceful sleeping while I made my escape. You should have seen yourself. This is going to be legendary. That's it. No explanation, no warning, just that smug little message and the realization that the woman I married had vanished. I'm lying there in this hotel bed completely disoriented, and the first thing I notice is how cold the sheets are on her side, like she's been gone for hours. Her suitcase isn't by the closet anymore. Her shoes aren't by the door. That little bottle of lavender perfume she carries everywhere, the one she's had since we started dating, it's gone too. Everything that proved she was ever here has disappeared. I call out her name, thinking maybe she went down for breakfast or stepped out to the balcony. Nothing but silence answers me back. My hands are shaking when I pick up the phone to call the front desk. Hi, this is David Cooper in room 418. I need to check if Madison Harper checked out. The woman on the other end has that perfectly trained, neutral voice that somehow makes everything feel worse. Yes, Mr. Cooper. Miss Harper checked out at approximately 2:45 this morning. She indicated that you two had separate departure arrangements and she took our airport shuttle service. Separate departure arrangements? That doesn't make any sense. We booked this entire trip together 8 months ago. Every detail planned down to the minute. I pull up my email and find the booking confirmation. 2 tickets on the same flight, seated right next to each other, departing Stockholm for Denver at 6:15 p.m. today. I stare at it, trying to make sense of what's happening. Then I call the airline directly. Hi, I need to verify a reservation under David Cooper, returning to Denver from Stockholm today. There's typing on the other end, then a pause that lasts way too long. Mr. Cooper, I'm showing that your itinerary was modified yesterday afternoon. Your return flight has been rescheduled to the following Tuesday. My stomach drops. That's impossible. I didn't change anything. There must be a mistake. More typing. According to our records, your companion, Miss Harper, contacted us to adjust both reservations. She departed this morning on our 5:45 a.m. flight to Chicago. Your departure was moved to next week per her specific request. The room starts spinning. She changed my flight. She left the country while I was sleeping. She stranded me here on purpose, planned it out, executed it, and now she's treating it like some kind of hilarious practical joke. I read that text message again and again. LMAO, you looked so peaceful sleeping while I made my escape. You should have seen yourself. This is going to be legendary. That's her farewell. No, I'm sorry. No, we need to discuss this. Just mockery and self-satisfaction, like she just pulled off the prank of the century. She genuinely believed this would be a funny story she could tell at parties. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here feeling like someone reached into my chest and yanked out my lungs. The thing is, I should have anticipated this. Not the abandonment specifically, that blindsided me completely, but the pattern, the way she operated, the constant chaos she created. Madison Harper had always described herself as spontaneous and free-spirited, like it was her brand, her identity. She wore those words like a badge of honor, convinced that being unpredictable made her more interesting, more authentic, more alive than everyone else. And maybe in the beginning, I bought into that narrative. Maybe I even found it exciting and different. But sitting alone in that cold hotel room halfway across the world, I started connecting dots I'd been deliberately ignoring for years. The warning signs had been there from early on. One of the first major incidents happened during our second Thanksgiving together. I came home from work the Wednesday before the holiday, exhausted and ready to prep for a quiet dinner with just the two of us. Madison was in the kitchen, humming along to music, acting like everything was completely normal. Oh, hey babe, so I forgot to mention earlier, but I invited a bunch of people over for tomorrow. I looked up from setting my bag down. A bunch? Like how many are we talking about? She waved her hand dismissively. I don't know, maybe 30 or 40. It'll be fun though. I actually laughed because I assumed she was joking. 40 people? Madison, we don't have enough chairs for 40 people. We don't have enough plates or food or space. She just shrugged like it was no big deal. You're amazing at figuring this stuff out. You'll make it work. That's what you do. And just like that, the responsibility became mine. I spent that entire night driving to 3 different grocery stores that were picked clean by other last-minute shoppers, calling neighbors to borrow folding tables and chairs, scrubbing bathrooms at 1 a.m. while she sprawled on the couch with a glass of wine scrolling through her phone. At one point, she looked up and said, "Planning parties is so draining." while I was literally on my hands and knees cleaning grout with a toothbrush. I should have recognized that moment for what it was. I should have said something, drawn a boundary, had a serious conversation. But instead, I convinced myself this was just what you did when you loved someone creative and spontaneous. You adapted, you accommodated, you made it work. Then there was the whole pottery wheel situation. We had been saving money for over a year for a trip to New Zealand. It was my dream trip, something I'd wanted to do since I was a teenager. I had spreadsheets tracking our savings, lists of restaurants we'd visit, hiking trails we'd explore, museums and cultural sites mapped out with meticulous detail. We were finally getting close to having enough money saved up. And then one random Tuesday, Madison came home with this massive pottery wheel in the back of her car. Look at this beauty. Isn't it incredible? I've always wanted to learn pottery, and this was on sale. I stood there in the driveway completely stunned. What about New Zealand? We've been saving for that for over a year. She was already dragging this thing toward the garage. We can always go next year or the year after. This was a limited time sale. I couldn't pass it up. You understand, right? That pottery wheel cost $1,300. She used it exactly 3 times, maybe 4 if I'm being generous. It collected dust in the corner of our garage for the next year and a half until she finally sold it on some online marketplace for about $400. We never made it to New Zealand. Every time I brought it up after that, there was always some new reason why we couldn't go, some new spontaneous purchase or decision that took priority. I kept telling myself these were just isolated incidents, minor quirks, the kinds of compromises everyone makes in relationships. Every couple has trade-offs, right? But sitting in that Stockholm hotel room, abandoned on another continent because my wife thought it would make a good story, I couldn't maintain that lie anymore. This wasn't spontaneity. This was a systematic pattern of selfishness that I'd spent years making excuses for because I didn't want to admit I'd married someone who fundamentally could not or would not consider my needs, my feelings, or my existence beyond how it served her narrative. That's when I met Sophia. I was down in the hotel lobby trying to convince the front desk staff to move me to a different room because I couldn't stand being in the one Madison had abandoned me in. There was this woman checking in next to me, probably around my age, with shoulder-length blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had a well-worn suitcase covered in stickers from different countries and a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. Something about her presence felt calm and grounded. I wasn't planning on talking to anyone. I was too busy trying to hold myself together, but while I'm explaining my situation to the clerk, she glanced over. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to eavesdrop, but did you just say your wife left you here?" I nodded, feeling my face flush with embarrassment. "Yeah, she caught a flight home early this morning. Didn't tell me she was leaving." Her expression immediately shifted to genuine concern, not pity or curiosity, but real empathy. "That's absolutely horrible. You must feel completely betrayed right now." That word landed like a physical blow. Betrayed. Not confused, not frustrated, not inconvenienced or caught off guard. Betrayed. Nobody had named what I was feeling so precisely, and hearing someone say it out loud made something crack open inside my chest. "Yeah," I managed to say quietly. "That's exactly what this feels like." "I'm Sophia," she said, extending her hand with a warm smile. "Sophia Anderson. I'm here attending a marine biology conference at the university." I shook her hand, grateful for the human contact. David Cooper." She tilted her head slightly, still with that concerned expression. "Do you need help with anything? Navigating the embassy, rebooking your flights, figuring out the transit system?" She said it so naturally, like offering assistance to a stranded stranger was just a normal part of her day, not some huge inconvenience. I hesitated because I didn't want to burden anyone, but something in her tone felt safe and genuine. "Actually, yeah, I could really use some help figuring out the whole embassy situation and getting a new flight booked." She nodded immediately. "Of course, come on, there's a cafe right around the corner. I'll pull up some information and we can figure this out together." We ended up sitting in that cafe for almost 2 hours while she pulled up websites and transit maps on her phone. I told her the whole story, every humiliating detail, and she just listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to make jokes to lighten the mood, didn't minimize what had happened or suggest maybe there was some misunderstanding. She just listened with this steady, focused attention that made me feel like what I was saying actually mattered. When I finally finished explaining everything, she set her coffee cup down and looked at me with this thoughtful expression. What she did to you, that wasn't lagom. We have this concept in Swedish culture, lagom. It means not too much and not too little, but just right, balanced and fair and considerate. What your wife did was the complete opposite of lagom. It was selfish and cruel. I repeated the word slowly, lagom. She nodded. It's a core value here, the idea that you should live in balance with fairness and consideration for others, taking more than your share or leaving someone else with less, that violates lagom. I sat there feeling those words settle into my bones. This stranger understood in 20 minutes what my wife had failed to grasp in 7 years of marriage. Sitting across from Sophia, I didn't feel stupid or overly sensitive, or like I was making a big deal out of nothing. I felt heard and validated and human. But as I sat there in that cafe with someone who'd shown me more genuine kindness in half an hour than my wife had shown me in months, one thought kept circling through my mind. If Sophia could see me this clearly after just meeting me, why had Madison never even tried? Over the next several days, Sophia showed me around Stockholm, not the typical tourist attractions or things you'd find in a guidebook, but real places that mattered to her. We walked through narrow cobblestone alleyways where buildings from the 1600s leaned toward each other like old friends sharing secrets. She pointed out architectural details I never would have noticed on my own, hand-carved cornices and decorative brackets and stonework that had been shaped by craftsmen centuries ago. See those grooves in the wood there? She'd say, gesturing up at some detail I'd walked past without a second glance. Those were carved entirely by hand. No power tools, no machines, just skill and patience. We'd end up having these long, winding conversations about architecture and design, about the relationship between form and function, about how structures need to be both beautiful and practical to truly last. She asked me real questions, substantive ones, and then actually listened to my answers with genuine interest. She let comfortable silences exist between us without feeling the need to fill every second with noise. She never made the conversation about herself, or tried to one-up my stories with her own. Somewhere between her story about her grandfather's bookshop and a detailed explanation of Arctic current patterns, something clicked into place for me. This felt completely effortless. With Sophia, I wasn't performing or trying to be someone I wasn't. I wasn't constantly bracing myself for the next crisis or trying to manage someone else's emotions or walking on eggshells waiting for the mood to shift. I was just existing as myself, and that was enough. With Madison, every single day had been a performance. If she spontaneously decided to throw a dinner party, I was the one who bought all the groceries and cleaned the house and arranged the furniture and managed the timing of everything. If she made some impulsive decision that created chaos, I was the one who dealt with all the consequences and fallout. If she called her constant disruption being spontaneous, then I was called rigid and boring and no fun whenever I didn't applaud her for it. I remember this one time she knocked over an entire glass of red wine onto our brand new cream-colored couch during a party she'd thrown without asking me, and she just laughed it off like it was nothing. Relax, David, it's just furniture. You're always so uptight about stuff like this. Things are meant to be used and lived in. I spent the entire next day researching stain removal techniques and scrubbing that couch while she slept until noon. I used to tell myself that her energy and spontaneity made life exciting, that her fire and passion needed my stability and groundedness to balance it out. But that wasn't balance at all. That was me being the safety net, the cleanup crew, the supporting character in her one-woman show where she got to be exciting and unpredictable while I got to be the responsible one who made sure life actually functioned. Sophia wasn't trying to be impressive or interesting or spontaneous. She didn't demand that I keep up with her energy or match her mood. She just showed up as herself, calm and steady and present. When she laughed, it was never at my expense. When I talked, she actually absorbed what I was saying instead of just waiting for her turn to speak. That evening, we sat on a bench overlooking the water, watching the sun start to dip toward the horizon, and I realized something profound. It felt completely foreign to not be exhausted by someone else's version of what love should look like. Sophia glanced over at me. You're being really quiet. What's going through your head? I thought about how to answer that honestly. I'm just realizing that I've spent years cleaning up after someone who never once stopped to ask if I was okay, and I'm realizing how tired I am. She didn't immediately try to fix it or offer advice or tell me what I should do. She just set her coffee down and looked at me with this steady, understanding expression that made me feel completely seen. And sitting there in that moment, I knew something fundamental had shifted in how I understood my own life. Because if this was what connection could feel like, what closeness and consideration could look like, then what exactly had I been surviving in my marriage all this time? I called my best friend Trevor back home that night. He answered on the second ring. Jesus, are you alive? I've been texting you. I let out a weak laugh. Barely hanging on, man. There was a pause. So it's actually true? Madison really just ditched you there? I explained the whole situation, the changed flight, the 2 a.m. escape, the mocking text message. There was this long silence on his end. David, that's not a prank. That's not funny or spontaneous or quirky. That's genuinely sociopathic behavior. The word hung in the air between us. Sociopathic. I hadn't let myself use that kind of language, hadn't wanted to make it sound that serious, but hearing Trevor say it out loud validated everything I'd been feeling. I keep trying to convince myself it was just another one of her impulsive moments, that she didn't really think it through. Trevor cut me off. No, being impulsive is deciding to grab ice cream at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. What she did required planning and intention and a complete disregard for you as a human being. She had to call the airline, change both bookings, pack her stuff, and sneak out in the middle of the night. That's premeditated cruelty. Later that same evening, my sister Julia called, and I could immediately tell she'd been crying. David, I'm so sorry. I should have said something years ago, and I didn't. Said something about what? About Madison, about the way she treats you. I always thought it was just her personality, that she was just high energy and spontaneous. But what she did to you in Stockholm, that's not normal behavior. That's not how someone treats a person they love. She continued, and my stomach started to knot up. Do you remember how she always seemed to have conflicts whenever I tried to visit you guys? There were all those last-minute work emergencies and sudden plans and reasons why it wasn't a good time. I thought back over the years. Yeah, I always figured it was just bad timing. Julia's voice got quieter. It wasn't bad timing. I started noticing it was a pattern. Every single time I made plans to come see you, suddenly Madison had some crisis or commitment that made it difficult. She even told me once, right after Dad died, that maybe I was bringing negative energy to family gatherings and that you didn't need that kind of stress. I felt my jaw clench. I remembered that conversation. Madison had told me Julia needed space to grieve, and that having her around was emotionally draining for everyone. I'd believed she was being considerate and thoughtful. She's been isolating you, Julia said, her voice breaking. She's been slowly cutting you off from the people who care about you, and I just stood by and watched it happen because I thought you seemed happy, and I didn't want to interfere in your marriage. I closed my eyes and felt the full weight of it settling over me. The missed holidays, the strained phone calls, the growing distance between me and everyone I'd been close to before Madison. None of it had been accidental. It had been systematic and deliberate. Madison hadn't just made herself the center of my universe. She'd carefully and methodically erased everyone else from it. And sitting there listening to my sister cry on the phone, I realized something even more disturbing. If she'd gone this far to isolate me from my support system, what else had she been willing to do that I hadn't even noticed? I started writing things down in a notebook, trying to map out the patterns instead of seeing them as isolated incidents. Madison always disrupted things. Plans, schedules, routines, goals I'd set for myself. Nothing ever seemed to hold her attention unless she could turn it into something dramatic or chaotic or spontaneous. Our entire life together had been a series of unpredictable turns and sudden changes, and I'd always been the one responsible for navigating us back to some semblance of stability. The Thanksgiving where she invited 40 people with less than 24 hours' notice. The pottery wheel that destroyed our New Zealand savings. The time she enrolled both of us in an intensive weekend workshop 4 hours away, despite knowing I had critical work deadlines, then accused me of being rigid and unsupportive when I couldn't just abandon my responsibilities. I looked down at what I'd written. Disrupt, dismiss, disappear, repeat. That was the cycle. This whole trip to Stockholm had been my idea from the start. I'd spent over 2 years saving money for it, researching and planning every single detail. The flights, the museums, the restaurants, walking tours, backup plans for bad weather, everything. Madison had said she loved the idea. said she was so excited to finally do this trip together. But then, in the weeks leading up to it, she'd started making these weird comments. Let's keep things flexible. Let's make this trip one we'll never forget. Let's shake things up and be really spontaneous. I'd thought she just meant being open to unexpected adventures, maybe stumbling into some cool local event or trying a restaurant we hadn't planned for. I never imagined she meant vanishing at 2:45 in the morning after secretly changing my flight and leaving me stranded in a foreign country. I'd spent so many years trying to justify her behavior, making excuses for her. She's just impulsive, I'd tell myself. She brings excitement and energy to my life. I bring stability and planning to hers. We balance each other out. But the truth was so much uglier than that comforting narrative I'd built. This wasn't balance. This was profound imbalance disguised as passion and spontaneity. It was carelessness and selfishness rebranded as creativity and adventure. And I was the one who'd been paying the price for it, emotionally and mentally and financially and in every other way. She calls it being adventurous and spontaneous, I muttered to myself while sitting in that cafe, tapping my pen against the notebook. But I am always the one packing the emergency supplies, fixing the problems she creates, covering the costs, managing the fallout, and apologizing to the people she offends. Sophia's word came back to me again. Lagom, balance, fairness, consideration. There was nothing balanced or fair about my marriage. Everything tilted in one direction, toward Madison's wants and needs and whims, and I had let it happen. For 7 years, I had made myself smaller and quieter and more accommodating just to keep the peace and avoid conflict. I had traded away my own dreams and goals to support hers, and I'd convinced myself that's what love looked like. But now, sitting here in Stockholm with actual clarity for the first time in years, I could finally see it for what it really was. A one-sided game where I was always the safety net, always the fallback plan, always the one left holding the pieces. And I was done playing that role. Because if Madison thought disappearing was her power move, her way of proving she could do whatever she wanted without consequences, she hadn't seen what I was capable of once I finally stopped cleaning up after her. On the morning of day 7, exactly 1 week after Madison had abandoned me, I woke up before my alarm went off. No racing thoughts, no tightness in my chest, no crushing anxiety about what kind of crisis I might need to manage today. Just stillness and quiet. And for the first time in years, I didn't immediately reach for my phone out of habit. I didn't check for texts from Madison, didn't scan for passive-aggressive messages or guilt-laden apologies disguised as jokes. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote down a single question at the top of a blank page. What do I actually want today? Not what would make her happy, not what crisis needs immediate attention, not what will prevent an argument or keep the peace. Just that one simple, revolutionary question about what I wanted. A few hours later, I was sitting across from Sophia at a cafe near the waterfront, watching early morning sunlight reflect off the windows of boats bobbing gently in the harbor. "You seem different this morning," she observed, stirring honey into her tea. I smiled, actually smiled. I made a decision when I woke up about not spending another single day managing someone else's chaos. She nodded slowly, didn't push for details, just waited to see if I wanted to elaborate. "So," she said eventually, "what do you want to do with today?" I thought about it for a moment. "Take me somewhere that matters to you, not something from a tourist guidebook or a famous landmark, somewhere that's actually meaningful in your life." Her entire face lit up with this genuine excitement, and a few hours later we were boarding a ferry headed toward a small island called Vaxholm. It was the kind of place Madison would have immediately dismissed as boring or too quiet or not worth the trip. But for me, it felt like rediscovering something essential I'd lost. Pastel-colored wooden houses lined narrow streets, children played by the docks without supervision, and the air smelled like salt water and pine forests. Sophia greeted shopkeepers who remembered her from childhood, showed me the rocky beach where her grandmother had taught her to swim, pointed out the small library where she'd spent entire summers reading. "This is where I come when Stockholm feels overwhelming," she said as we sat on a bench eating cardamom rolls from a local bakery that had been there for generations. "This place reminds me of who I actually am underneath all the noise and expectations." I nodded, feeling those words resonate deep in my chest. I had completely forgotten what it felt like to have actual space in my mind, room in my life to ask myself what felt right instead of just what would avoid conflict. For so many years, every single decision I made had been filtered through Madison's emotions and reactions, processed through the constantly shifting lens of her moods and desires and unpredictable whims. But now I was sitting with someone who didn't require constant management or emotional labor. Someone who let silence stretch out comfortably between us without needing to fill every moment with activity or drama. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to someone else's crisis. I was just existing. I feel like I'm remembering a version of myself that used to exist, I said quietly, watching a small boat cut through the calm water. Sophia looked at me with this soft expression. Maybe that person was never actually gone. Maybe he was just buried under years of other people's expectations, waiting for permission to come back. And as the afternoon sun created patterns of light across the water, and I realized I hadn't thought about Madison even once in the past several hours, a new question surfaced in my mind. If I could feel this free and clear after just 7 days, what would it feel like after 7 months? On that 7th morning, exactly 1 week after Madison had left me sleeping in that hotel room, I sent her a text message. Nothing dramatic or emotional, no accusations or questions demanding answers. Just one simple line. Thank you for this. Sophia has been incredibly kind through everything. My phone started ringing within 30 seconds. I answered it. Madison. Who the hell is Sophia? Her voice was sharp and high-pitched, riding that edge of panic I recognized so well. She's a marine biologist, I replied calmly, looking out my hotel window at people going about their morning routines. She helped me when my wife abandoned me on another continent, and I needed someone to talk to. I didn't abandon you, Madison snapped immediately. Stop being so dramatic. You had credit cards and a phone. You're a grown adult. You weren't helpless. I took a slow, steady breath. No, you're right about that. I figured out this week that I'm not helpless at all. There was silence on her end for a moment. Then she laughed, but it sounded nervous and forced. Come on, David, you're being ridiculous about this. It was supposed to be funny, a story we'd tell later. You always overthink everything and turn it into this big serious thing. I thought if I forced you into a spontaneous situation, if I shook up your rigid planning for once, maybe you'd loosen up a little. You micromanage every detail of our lives. I stood there feeling remarkably calm. And you genuinely thought that stranding me in a foreign country without warning was the way to accomplish that, she scoffed. I thought we'd laugh about it eventually. I didn't think you'd go completely silent and make it into some big betrayal. I didn't think you'd start spending time with some random Swedish woman. You didn't think at all, Madison, I said evenly. Or maybe you did think about it, and you just didn't care how it would affect me. She went very quiet. When she finally spoke again, her voice had gotten colder and sharper. So what? You're just going to throw away 7 years of marriage over some woman you barely know? Is that what this is? I'm not throwing away anything. I'm finally seeing our marriage clearly for the first time in years. And Sophia? She didn't manipulate me or abandon me in the middle of the night or change my travel plans without my knowledge. She just treated me like a human being whose feelings mattered. She's a rebound, Madison said, voice dripping with contempt. You're confused and emotional, and you're going to regret this when you come to your senses. No, Madison. What I regret is spending 7 years of my life calling dysfunction adventure. I regret making excuses for cruelty by calling it creativity. And I regret convincing myself that love meant endlessly cleaning up after someone who never once considered cleaning up after me. You're not being fair, she whispered, and I could hear tears in her voice now. I know, I replied quietly. I spent 7 years being fair while you were being spontaneous. I'm done with that now. I ended the call. She tried calling back 16 more times over the next 2 hours. Text messages started flooding in, oscillating between apologies and accusations and attempts at manipulation. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't feel guilt or fear or confusion, just this clear, bright sense of certainty, that weight that had been sitting on my chest for years, pressing down on my lungs, making every breath feel labored. It was completely gone. In its place was something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten it existed. Actual peace. I never tried to get even or hurt her back. I didn't have to. The truth has a way of landing quietly without big fights or scenes. While I spent 2 months in Stockholm piecing myself back together, Madison's carefully built image started to crumble. Her secret getaway didn't stay secret for long. People talk, especially mutual friends who notice when someone doesn't come home on time. Trevor, who never softens the truth, told everyone straight. She ditched him. Not just left, she disappeared. Changed his flight, snuck out at 2 a.m., then texted that it was hilarious. At first, I heard the fallout only through Julia, little updates. Friends from her college circle pulled away, party invites stopped. Her once polished Instagram went silent, then work trouble hit at her architecture firm. Whispers spread among clients and coworkers. If she can treat her own husband like that, what will she do to us mid-project? One client said. Trust matters more than bold ideas. Soon, partners cut her out of meetings, reassigned her projects, and questioned her reliability. Even her family shifted. Her mom called Julia furious and ashamed. I didn't raise her to treat people this way. Her younger brother admitted he'd never trusted her to stick to plans, always making backups just in case. 3 weeks later, Madison called me again. This time, she wasn't angry. She was wrecked. I picked up, maybe out of curiosity. She sobbed so hard I could barely make out her words. Everyone hates me. Julia won't pick up. Trevor told everyone my boss is doubting me. Mom won't speak to me. My friends are gone. She was unraveling, but I felt no victory, only calm. I asked, what did you think would happen when people learned you abandoned your husband in a foreign hotel and called it funny? She couldn't answer, only cried harder. I let her cry until she hung up. Then I silenced my phone and walked into the calm Stockholm night. The city didn't owe me anything, and I didn't owe it anything either. Justice doesn't always show up in explosions or shouting. Sometimes it's the quiet moment when you realize you don't need an apology to be free. I stayed in Sweden far longer than planned. What began as crisis slowly turned into healing. Not overnight, but in small steps, the way Stockholm reveals itself if you take time to look. Sophia was the reason I stayed, though she never pushed me. One afternoon, she mentioned her research team needed an engineer for a short project, structural work on a climate ship bound for the Arctic. It's not glamorous, she warned. Mostly spreadsheets, documents, and a lot of cold. I laughed. I like cold. I'm from Colorado. The hiring process moved quickly. Soon I was on a research vessel heading north, surrounded by people who didn't know my past, who only cared about what I could do now. Sophia and I worked side by side, but we didn't rush. No pressure to label things, just walks on deck after work, quiet talks about oceans and structures, the strange rhythm of waves instead of clocks. One night, we stood in heavy coats, watching the midnight sun paint the sky in impossible colors. She looked at me and said softly, "You've changed. You're not bracing anymore." She was right. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next explosion. I wasn't the cleanup crew. I was simply myself. We shared meals, traded stories, and let silence sit without needing to fill it. No games, no masks. One afternoon, she asked, "Do you ever miss her?" I didn't need her to say the name. I thought for a moment. I missed the version I thought was real, but that was more my hope than her truth. Sophia didn't press. She just nodded. Some days I helped her team with equipment. Other days we ran late-night simulations. In between, something I'd lost returned. A quiet confidence. A sense of direction built on what mattered instead of what I tried to control. This wasn't a rebound. It wasn't about replacing Madison. It was about building something new, slowly and honestly. And as our ship cut through Arctic ice under the strange midnight sun, I realized the most important structure I'd ever rebuild wasn't made of steel or concrete. It was me. And for the first time in 7 years, that foundation felt steady and real.